All right, everybody, it's time for Red Rain episode 161. Let's welcome in your host, Walter Mitchell.
Thank you, Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter. Sorry about your San Diego Padres. Um, but man, so close, so close. Was rooting big time for them, and now I'm rooting for the Mets to knock off those Dodgers. So maybe there'll be another miracle Mets situation. I was privy to the first miracle Mets in 1969. That was phenomenal with one of my idols, Tom Seaver. So, but there's no crying in baseball, but I'm going to cry today in football because we're going to talk today about. Yeah, I'm watching. I was at my niece's wedding in Manchester, Vermont this weekend, and it was stunning. And the wedding was on Sunday, so I could only watch a little bit of the first half, and the part that I watched was just so disappointing um, and just such a letdown coming off that great win in Santa Clara that I just started thinking, I feel like I've been feeling this all along, but now it just came to such a head that I thought to myself, my relationship with the Cardinals as a fan is abusive. I mean, it's abusive. I mean, and so many of you may be able to relate to this. I mean, let me put it to you this way. I'm going to use an analogy that I've always found fascinating about abusive relationships. And I'm going to apply it here to what I'm feeling about the Cardinals. Um, so they did an experiment with laboratory rats where they had 10 cages and they put one rat in each cage. And in each cage, you had a trowel of water and a bowl of food. And so, and then they studied, and then they did this. Every now and then, when the rat would go for the water or for the food, they'd zap it electronically with a shock. And of course, it sent the rat scurrying back to the back of the cage and where it was in a corner, cowering and wondering until finally, like necessity had to take over, and rather than risk starving or being dehydrated, the rat would summon up the courage to go take from the water or food again. And they, by the next time, they were successful. And so they were feeling good about that. But then every now and then, when they go back for more, zap. And the cycle would repeat and repeat itself of the rat scurrying back to the back corner of the cage, cowering there for hours on end until it summoned up the courage to try again. And then, so occasionally rewarded, occasionally, or a lot of times, zapped. And the interesting thing about this experiment was that what the scientists wanted to do is see what happens when you open the cage to give the rats a chance to escape. And guess what the stats were? Of the 10 rats, how many rats chose to take that moment and get the hell out of there? What would you guess, Kyle?
I'm gonna guess six.
Okay, the answer was zero.
Really?
No rat left the cage. Okay, and then so what psychologists took this experiment and applied it to abusive relationships, because there's something that keeps people in abusive relationships. Like every now and then you get rewarded. It's not entirely abuse all the time, but then typically those rewards are thwarted by certain letdowns, and to the points of certain traumas, actually, at times too, because getting zapped is kind of traumatizing, isn't it? So I've always thought about that experiment and wondered, why people stay in abusive relationships as long as they do. And I think it's a great question. And for me, as a Cardinals fan all these years, the pattern has been occasional rewards with a whole lot of zaps. And this season is kind of characteristic of what's been like to be a Cardinals fan, because every now and then we get nicely rewarded with a certain game that the Cardinals play great in. Like last year, the Philly game was awesome. And for a moment, it gives you a great feeling of hope. But then, I was one of the few Cardinal fans who was bitterly, bitterly disappointed the Seahawks beat the Cardinals in Week 18 last year. That still sticks in my craw. And I'm not a fan of tanking games ever. And I feel like there's more to be gained by the players relishing in the joy of victory and all the hard work that it takes than it is to lose at any price. So, that would have solved, for me, what's been going on. I've been paying attention to since the Green Bay game in 2021, where basically the Cardinals were looking like a fortress at 7-0, and the wind blew, and down came a house of cards ever since. That fateful, errant pass to AJ Green, or in his case, never turned around. The whole ending of that game was just so bitter, and so unavoidable if they'd done this right. So but from that point on, it's been really rough sailing, and we haven't been anything like the 7-0 team. Of course, losing J.J. Watt. I'm going to talk about J.J. Watt at some point in this podcast, because, in my opinion, he was one of the greatest things that ever happened to the Cardinals. And the fact that they squandered his 2 years there, now he gave us the confidence on defense to go 7-0, and we were really missing him afterwards. But he did everything he could to come back for the playoffs, which was miraculous. And unfortunately, by then, this team was cooked. Had no confidence left without him. But then we had him for the next year with the Super Bowl coming to our building, and we know the off-season stuff that derailed all of those possibilities. And it's just such a shame that it happened all that way, and it's been terrible since. But here's the thing, was if we win the Seahawks game, we get off the schneid of not winning consecutive games since being 7-0. Think about that. How long has it been since that stretch 7-0? Kyle, can you pull up that graphic the second graphic that I sent you about the winning, the Cardinals record since then? Can you read that?
Since going 7-0 and 3-0 versus the NFC West in 2021, Kyler Murray has a 10-23 record, 2-9 in the NFC West, and has not won 2 games in a row at any point during that 33 game span.
And neither has the team. So it's not just Kyler. I was pointing this out. I texted this out on Twitter or tweeted it out because I just find it remarkable that, you know, these numbers I find very highly remarkable. And people say, you'd be surprised at how many of those games the Cardinals were actually favored. All of them in 2021 in the second half of the season, except the playoff game in LA. So, look at that 33 game span. Haven't won back-to-back games once. And, so finish it out. What's the second part?
Yet up until and including the 7-0 stretch, Kyler was 20-19-1, 51% winning percentage, winning 2 games in a row 8 times.
I mean, and people look back on those days with disdain. Scapegoating Cliff Kingsbury as being the problem that ruined everything. And since then, that has not aged well, considering what Cliff Kingsbury is doing in Washington with a rookie quarterback, actually having historical implications and achievements thus far. And Cliff Kingsbury actually did a couple historical things in Arizona while he was the titular head coach, not given any power of a head coach, but was named head coach. He was one of one of very few coaches in Arizona or in Cardinals history since they were the Chicago Cardinals to take a team to playoffs. He had the second highest wins in a season with 11 in franchise history, tied with BA, and BA had the highest with 13 back in 2015. I mean, so he's in that company, and he holds a 124-year franchise record of winning 8 road games in a singular season, which I thought was absolutely phenomenal and incredible. Never seen anything like that. And a lot of those games were East Coast games that they won that year on the road. So kudos to all that. It just seems like bizarre to me that, fans have basically burned Cliff Kingsbury in effigy when, by comparison, he's one of the rare coaches who's gotten us to the playoffs. And what has it been, like 14 years and 124 or something like that? It's like bizarre. So, yeah, I mean, 2 games in a row. So after the 49ers game and the just tremendous conclusion of that game, I was thinking, I imagine you were too, that, wow, maybe this is it. Maybe that was, the water rush that broke the dam. And maybe now, I was really hopeful. My hopes got so high for this game at Lambeau. I was even wrote an article saying, are the Cardinals ready to take a Lambeau-sized leap? I really got high on the Cardinals' chances there. Green Bay's been up and down this season, and Jordan Love's been injured and, not quite himself. He had been struggling coming in to a degree, and I just thought it was ripe for the Cardinals, seeing how they played in the second half against the 49ers. But with this team, there's like no carryover at all. I mean, they don't get, like, where was that defense in the first half that played, that shut out the 49ers in the second half? You wouldn't think you're watching the same group at all. I mean, and on offense, in week 2, we saw a diversified offense where Kyler Murray was being used on all different, sort of occasions, running bootlegs, short waggles, long waggles, and had his best game maybe as a pro from start to finish. I mean, he had just an awesome game against the Rams. And since then, it's been such a mixed bag. It doesn't look anything like what we saw versus the Rams that day. Why? I mean, what happened where, you know, how much was that success too much to try to replicate? And it's just such a letdown. I mean, so get your hopes up like this, thinking like, wow, this could be something really special. And Kyler, was before the season was, calling Drew Petzing a genius and said, and making comparisons like, now I don't have to be Superman every play, buying into the narrative that the fans and pundits have pushed that I always cringed at because, put it this way, quarterbacks in the NFL at times have to put the team on their backs. They're the tone setters. And, sometimes you got to do a lot by yourself to get your team up and to get things started out in games and finished off in games. And, this notion that Kyler had to do it all by himself is such bullshit. I mean, and it's such an insult to all the hard-nosed players he's played with during those years that brought the Cardinals to a playoff 11-win season that's only been done twice in the history of the franchise of 124 years. So, it's such a diss and such a cop-out. But Kyler was saying, we're going to be top 5 offense. We're going to be competing for Super Bowls. We're going to be doing all this talk about how great this is. And now, people are saying that Kyler was fine on Sunday in Green Bay. And I got to tell you something. If that's the standard for Kyler now, and it's never going to change. Because look at the opening drive on third and long with the miscommunication to Marvin Harrison. I mean, they had all week to figure that stuff out. And we know it's been an issue of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler not getting in a good enough sync. And they come out and Kyler airmails that pass, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is looking confused. In fact, when you look at the play, it looks like Harrison's in a blocking position on his man who's right, blanketing him. I mean, what was going on with that? Then you compound that with there's only one quarterback in the NFL this season who hasn't completed a single third and long. We know who that is. And here's my thing too: is if Marvin Harrison Jr. is covered, why do you throw it? Why not check down and look for option number 2 on the play? And if there isn't an option number 2 on the play, that's wrong. Because there always should be complementary routes and progressions. And, and then the next time they throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. was just bizarre. I mean, that quick slant, he's in the cloud. I mean, not only was he, dogged on the play, he had a safety sitting right in his lap. I mean, I don't know why you throw that pass for, what do you hope to gain? 4 yards? And we know that's not Marvin Harrison Jr.'s strength. If you look at his college tapes, he's not particularly keen on running passes over the middle, and particularly with a safety bearing down on him. And not too many receivers are. We were spoiled by Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald, who'd catch any ball in a hurricane and try to advance it. But, and add insult to injury, Marvin Harrison Jr. gets concussed. So here he is in his 6th game as a pro. The Cardinals clearly haven't figured out how to use him. In fact, I think it's reminiscent of Isaiah Simmons. I mean, they didn't have a plan for Simmons coming in, a coherent plan. I mean, last week I was hopeful that they'd start diversifying how they get Marvin Harrison the ball. So I wrote an article saying that, and some of you have seen it, and if some of you haven't, I'm offering all sorts of suggestions of how they can make life easier for Marvin Harrison Jr. by running him on short motions, feeding into what he did really well at Ohio State. Running him on short crossers. He was great doing that at Ohio State. So you hit him on the other side where he has big run after catch possibilities. There's any time that cornerbacks are giving him cushion, they should throw the out pass every time for 7 yards. It's just easy. They would have had that on the fateful Bosa interception. If you look at that play, the cornerback was like 8 yards cushion. You just throw that out pass, and it was on that hash mark on to that side. So Kyler, that would have been an easy throw and catch for 7 yards on a first down, or it was second down and 5 or something. It would have been a first down conversion. But there are so many other ways of rubbing him off short motions, off another receiver, lining him up in the slot where I think he's going to be better, from running corner routes and and digs and whip routes. There's so much you can do with him. Running sprint motions into cheat fades, which it would be unstoppable for him with his size. I mean, really hard to defend for cornerbacks. I mean, there's so much you can do with him, but there's no creativity in this offense for him yet. And the quarterback is not connecting with him. It just seems bizarre, almost like a consequence of, doing everything you can to lose in a season to draft this guy, that you don't really know what to do with him. And it's an issue. And I think probably this week, like Trey McBride, he's going to be sit out a game. And when he comes back, I don't know if this will make him more tentative. Fortunately for us, Trey McBride looked great 2 days, 3 weeks after his concussion. And doesn't look like he's missing a beat at all. And kid's such a baller and should be our number one option, should have been all along. And here's one more frustration that I have about the Marvin Harrison's Jr. situation is I predicted all this. It was easy. If you didn't have a plan for him, and because, Monti Ossenfort came into town saying how he was going to sync everything up. Well, the selection of Marvin Harrison Jr. was not in sync with where the direction of this offense was going. I mean, the great success they had last year was out of 12 and 13 personnel. And, that's why I argued Brock Bowers would be a better pick because he's an instant system fit. Joe Alt would have been a better fit. I mean, so if you're going offense there, I still think the best thing would have been to trade down a little and tap one of those edge rushers like Leo Latu or Jared Verse or something like that because of how weak we are on the edges. But just the same, if you're going to draft offense at the top of this draft, there were players who were better system fits than Marvin Harrison Jr. And it begged the question to me whether, and I've been mentioning this, I have this gut feeling that MHJ was not Monty and Dave's number one player on their board. And I think they probably wanted a system fit. But I think it's quite possible and probably likely that because of the hue and cry of Cardinal fans wanting to tank for Marv for over a year, that they were going to, if Marvin was there, they were going to deliver him on a silver platter. And, you know, but here's what I said at the time was that if you add him in there, what's it going to do to your offense? Is it going to take away from, if you draft a player that high and he's supposed to be what everybody's saying is a generational talent, you can't just target him 4 or 5 times a game, right? But then if you try to target him more, what are you getting away from what made you so successful in the 12 and 13 personnel, right? So that was going to create some issues for the team, and it has, because this is an offense now that's trying to search back for what its true identity is. And it didn't surprise me that in the second half, getting back to sort of the roots from last year, they did some good things in the offense, particularly to McBride, until the turnover bug, was happening. And but they were getting some good things going. I thought Amari DiMercato had a really good second half. So did Trey McBride and such. And Michael Wilson is coming on. I mean, that's the irony, is right now, of all the wide receivers, Kyler has the best chemistry with Michael Wilson. So, but it's just frustrating that from one week to the next, we don't see a carryover. There doesn't seem to be much, every game's like a reset. And, I mean, what can we expect moving forward? And is it just going to be a teaser game every now and then? It gets us all excited, and then we get our hopes up again, and then get a clunker like, coming off the last 2 wins. It's just so frustrating. It feels abusive, because watching a game like that, watching the Commanders game, it's just, you look at yourself and go, what am I doing trying to believe in this team when they come out and play like this? I have many, many more thoughts about that, but I want to turn to Kyle right now because, excuse me one second. Kyle grew up in San Diego, and by natural birth, he was born a Chargers fan. And of course, there were times to really love what was going on there, particularly when my favorite head coach of all time, who was from San Diego State, Don Air Coryell, was down there making big time waves with his Air Coryell offense, and all the nice players they had down there. Who was the quarterback? Dan
Fouts.
Yeah, Dan Fouts. I mean, that guy could, the best he could run was a 5.4 40. And he had cement shoes, but boy, could he sling it. And there were some glory days there with him down there. But anyway, what's interesting today is to have Kyle here with us, because there was a time for him when enough was enough, and he couldn't take it anymore. So, Kyle, what was that like? How did it happen? I mean, he's no longer a Chargers fan, and
No,
let's hear why.
no, I am not a Charger fan. I joke at this point. I'm now a 7-year recovering Charger fan at this point. It's going on 8 years now, which is just baffling to think about how old I'm getting. I'm not that old, but that used to be something that mattered so much, and now so many years later it doesn't. And you brought up the abusive relationship experiment with the rats earlier too, and
Yeah,
I think that it proves a point with sports fandom. The comparison I've always used, and I've used this for years, is comparing it to like a narcotic of some kind. It's like you
right.
get that sensation of dopamine, the excitement week to week, but then it ends in heartbreak and then you get used to the heartbreak and you get used to being let down and you
Right.
keep coming back like it's a narcotic, thinking that it will eventually get better or that if I pay my dues now, it will eventually work out in the long run. I'll get that championship. I'll if I keep emotionally investing over and over again, eventually it will make the championship that much sweeter or that much greater. Or when the success happens, I will be the super fan that stuck with it. And I've always thought that that is admirable in some ways and ultimately insane in other ways because as much as sports teams that we root for are teams that we want to get excited for, or they're communities of people that we can get excited about, rooting together in our common interest and goal. They ultimately are also like billion-dollar corporations. And the idea of being deeply emotionally invested in the success or failure of billion-dollar corporations, it seems kind of inane when you stop to think about it. And only in this prism of professional sports, where we've created these different rules and different structures, and making money isn't the only thing that's supposed to matter. That's the only space that we make it feel a little bit different. And for me with the Chargers, they gave me a lot of exit ramps along the way. I talk about this with these narcotic fan bases, whether it's the Detroit Lions, the Atlanta Falcons, the Las Vegas Raiders, teams that just have had no success for 20, 30, 40 years. um, they give you exit ramps along the way, right? Like for the
Right.
Chargers, it was in 2006 when they beat Tom Brady in the playoffs by intercepting a 4th and 6, and then Marlon McCree fumbles the football, and the Patriots recover and they go down and score. A 14-2 team had Tom Brady beat, and then they fumbled the ball after
Oh,
the game-winning interception.
oh,
Or 2010, where the Chargers, I remember this, I was a child. I went to the last game of the regular season against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Chargers were on a 11 game win streak, longest in franchise history. They were the number one seed in the AFC. Philip Rivers and Tomlinson was gone at this point, but it's Philip Rivers and Antonio Gates and Malcolm Floyd. They had the number one offense in the NFL. I think Darren Sproles was still there at that point.
oh yeah.
Number one offense in the league, 11 straight wins, a franchise record, number one seed in the AFC, get to the playoffs and lose to Mark Sanchez and the Jets. First game in the playoffs, lose to Mark Sanchez and the Jets. 2013, they had an incredible run to the playoffs, and it was exciting and all that stuff. I think 2011 was the year that they had the number one offense and the number one defense statistically in the league and somehow missed the playoffs. I think that's a real stat that exists, is that they had the number one ranked offense and number one ranked defense and went 9-7. The Chargers just are one of those franchise, and people who've watching football for years have been making jokes at the Chargers' expense. They give you exit ramps along the way, but the one that was finally the tipping point was the relocation. When you physically break up a community and take them out of the city,
Right.
that's the moment when it's like you've already been breaking up our hearts for years. I've seen
Right.
my grandparents, my parents, and now me go their entire lives without the Chargers winning a championship. So you've been breaking hearts for 50 years. You're going to up and leave the city. So there's nothing left at that point. So for me and a lot of San Diego Chargers fans, the relocation was that tipping point, but it took years of heartbreak and narcotic moments along the way to get us to that point. And so ultimately a lot of teams go through that. I know Raider fans went through the same thing. It was just years and years of heartbreak, year after year of Jamarcus Russells and Lane Kiffins and 0-10 Dennis Allens, and ultimately the team relocated. And then in Vegas they immediately tear down the best team they've had in 20 years by trading Khalil Mack and trading Amari Cooper. And then the coach gets caught being a public bigot and he's gone now. And the Raiders have just had so many moments where it's just like, why are you still hanging around? Why are you still investing in this organization that clearly is just running afoul with your fandom and treating you as if you're a given? And there's
Right.
so many times along the way when you stop and think, why do you still do this when you root for these narcotic fan bases? And for me, I just happened to experience it at a young age because of the Chargers relocation. And after
Right.
that, it was kind of like I don't think this is really worth it anymore. I mean,
Right.
I didn't get really any sports success as a kid. I mean, the
Right.
Padres were terrible my entire childhood, from age 4 to age 19. Never made the playoffs.
Right.
Chargers relocate. San Diego doesn't have a basketball team, and you know that story. You go through uh, with the San Diego sports curse. You live through Junior Seau dying, and that being a huge grieving point for the city. Tony Gwynn dying at a young age, and that being a grieving point for the city. You know, you go through these heartbreaking moments that kind of make you realize, all of this isn't really that serious, and all of this isn't really worth the emotional investment if you're going to root for a team that doesn't really hold up their end of the deal, right? Because these should be transactions, right? They shouldn't be
Right.
undying loyalty to a sports team that ultimately is a profit first company and maybe we'll win on the football field, but as long as we make money, then we're ultimately okay, right? It shouldn't be,
Right.
if that's going to be the mindset and all of these teams are under that mindset, you don't become a billion-dollar corporation without putting profit first. You got to kind of have a bit of a transactional relationship with some of these teams. And for me, I've kind of gone in and out on fandoms. Usually it's like fun stories or fun players or things like that. Like I love watching Kansas City because I've loved watching the greatness of Patrick Mahomes and appreciating that
Right.
greatness while it's happening in real time. So, something like
Yep.
that gets me excited, but ultimately it's I don't I've seen too much and I've experienced too much failure to really get deeply emotionally invested in sports teams again, to the point where I'm riding or dying with results. I still want them
Right.
to succeed, but I'm not riding or dying with the results anymore. We can talk about this from the Cardinals perspective as well, but that's just kind of my tormented childhood and tormented
Right.
young life of being a sports fan has taught me that, I really just am not going to ride or die with results anymore. I'm not going to be that diehard who is so deeply emotionally invested. Like even in the Super Bowl last year, I wanted Kansas City to win very badly, but there's a lot of 49er fans in my life, and if Kansas City had lost, I would have celebrated right along with them because they were happy and they were excited. And there's no reason that my fandom should take away from that, because there's more important things than riding or dying for a football team that, or a sports team that you can't control the outcome or the results for.
Yeah. Well said. And my conundrum now is just to get straight to the point is um, I don't see any of the current people in place delivering a championship to the for the Arizona Cardinals and not even coming close. And of all the owner, the go through this quickly. I mean, I don't have to say much about the owner. Everybody knows um, the issues about the owner. Um, and I was hoping he was going to take more of a back seat, but I really believe he pushed Marvin Harrison Jr. on the front office and made that a reality for the fans. This is what he does. That's why he caved in and gave Kyler Murray his bag at a time when he knew the player it would piss the players off something fierce. He had a divided locker, not even divided. The vast majority of the locker room was really fed up with Kyler at that point. And it just, I said at the time, if he caved in and gave Kyler his bag, it would set the team back years. And at this point, when Kyler still was posturing for his bag, we had a Super Bowl caliber team. Maybe not one of the top two or three, but we had, with J.J. Watt coming back, with Rodney Hudson, with some of the, trades that Steve Keim made, which were really good trades starting out, or in the acquisition of J.J. Watt. And, DeAndre Hopkins was on the run. I mean, we had some star power on that team that all got derailed in the off-season drama. And, when Kyler Murray scrubbed his socials of everything Cardinals, that was it for me. Like when, Bill Parcells said, when a player shows you who he is, believe him. And that's who Kyler is to me, a guy who's money first, me first, at the expense of wiping out. And here's the thing about Kyler to me is the lack of staying power. And if you look at his career beyond Allen High School, it's been an issue everywhere he's gone, practically. I mean, so you have, at A&M, that the whole thing blew up. He wanted to go there for his dad, I'm sure, because of the legacy. But, he only was able to start a couple of games there, and that didn't go too well. So then he transfers to a school that can't play for until finally Baker Mayfield graduates. And by then he'd already assured the Oakland A's that he was going to play baseball. And, and then he has the audacity to betray the A's on his promise there, because you don't draft a guy in the top 10 without a promise. And the A's are probably now kicking themselves in the butt that they gave him the chance to play at Oklahoma in his final chance. But, so, and then he has the audacity to walk around in Oakland A's gear. Like the A's fans like him or something. A's fans are ripped. I mean, they should be. I mean, it's just this lack of awareness or a naivete or something about Kyler that, I give him credit for how hard he attacked the rehab. And now finally he's, more devoted to being what you're supposed to be as a franchise quarterback. So, but unfortunately he's had really good moments this season, but it's like classic of Kyler to have these breathtaking moments where you say, oh my God, this guy's amazing. But then so many letdown moments in between that it's hard, the lack of consistency. And like I say, staying power. I mean, that Rams game was the best, most focused I've seen Kyler play 60 minutes of football since, back when the team, like that opening game win in Tennessee was another where Kyler was just on it all day long. Fantastic. But that's been such a rarity to get 60 minutes of focused on target football from him. And the staying power issue is an issue for me. So because of that, and because I for some reason, Kyler just brings some bad karma on himself. He always does. He's like, throwing Cliff Kingsbury under the bus. And you know what the karma of that's going to end up being? In retrospect, when people look back at his career, they're going to think he had his best years with Cliff Kingsbury. And imagine if he had done what Jaden Daniels is doing right now, who's meeting Cliff at 4:30 in the morning every morning to get in workouts so that they can start their day and prepare for the opponents together. I mean, imagine Kyler had that kind of a commitment and work ethic from the beginning. But he didn't. And, maybe for the same reasons why he didn't want to play at Texas Tech, who was, and ironically, it would have been better for him to go to Tech after, Texas A&M, because he would have played there. And then I always was wondering to myself, how do you have a talent like Kyler Murray at Oklahoma and you play Baker Mayfield in front of him? What do you think about that, Kyle? Why do you think? I mean, if you had your choice, you're in Oklahoma, and you have Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray in the same roster, right? How is it that Baker Mayfield won the confidence of the coaches and Kyler did?
Because Baker Mayfield is it's crazy to say Baker Mayfield might be the best college football quarterback of the last 15 years. Like I don't understand how that difference between college and the NFL still exists in the modern day and age, how some players play better or worse in college versus the NFL. But Baker Mayfield's game was just so designed for that air raid offense with Lincoln Riley and so great in college that even though Kyler Murray was the superior quarterback, Baker Mayfield being the incumbent who had tremendous success the year before, I think that was the year Oklahoma went to the playoff and lost to Clemson, I want to say. Baker Mayfield had tremendous success the year before and only got better in the following season, which
Right,
when you look back at the
right,
numbers of it, I know that college football analytics aren't quite as prominent as NFL analytics, but Baker had
right.
one of the greatest seasons in the history of
It,
college football. And I don't know what intangibles or skill or leadership ability equates to that, but
right,
Baker Mayfield was as great as Kyler Murray was in college, one of the great quarterbacks in the history of
right.
college football as well. Baker Mayfield has a case to be like the best college football quarterback of the last 15 years.
So, but aren't we seeing it playing out now in the NFL? Who's the better NFL quarterback?
Baker Mayfield's the better NFL quarterback, but that wasn't always the case, right? It was Kyler, and then it was Baker, and then it was Kyler again, and now it's back to
Right,
Baker, and
right.
neither of them are really lighting it up as like surefire top 10 quarterbacks right now. As great as Baker Mayfield is, I don't think most people are like going down their list and saying Baker Mayfield's a top 10 quarterback in the league. It's gone
Oh,
back and
really?
forth through their careers.
Oh, did you
Maybe they
see what he
do.
did this week?
Oh yeah, no,
Oh my God!
Baker's been fantastic. He is a franchise quarterback, no question. I'm not, putting
Right,
him down like that. I'm just, you know, putting him with the Justin Herberts and the Lamar Jacksons and the Joe Burrows might not be what
right,
most people equate to Baker Mayfield. But
right,
both Baker Mayfield is a legitimate franchise quarterback, and that's not something I thought I would say 2 years ago.
right. And I think the humility that he had to endure was a good thing for him. He deserved much better in Cleveland. He tried to play through that shoulder injury that was popping out. He had
It
a
was a
great run
shoulder
with that
and a
the year before, winning over the Steelers in the playoffs. But one thing that Kyler and Baker Mayfield have in common now in the NFL is we're kind of stifled in a Stefanski style offense, which is run heavy and not very passer friendly. And Mayfield had the best year they've had from a quarterback. If you go back and look at the stats back when he took the team to the playoffs that year, that was a really good stat year within that system. And they haven't had a quarterback, match that since. Although Joe Flacco did some good things for them last year down the stretch, even that's pales in comparison. Deshaun Watson's been nothing in that offense. Um, so they've been a mess. I mean, this year I think the Browns are the only team that hasn't scored over 20 points. Um,
Yeah, in
so,
DVOA offense, the Browns are 32 out of 32 right now,
mm,
which is worse than the offensive
right,
coordinator they just fired, Alex Van Pelt, because again,
right,
they've moved on from him, Petzing left. They don't really have a great offensive play caller at this point.
right. And the predictable thing now is that Cardinal fans are blaming Petzing when last year he was like so better than Cliff. And, I kept trying to bring people back to reality that, Cliff's track record of high powered offenses is prolific. I mean, he's only had in his career a couple of down years. The rest have been top 10 offenses wherever he's been with high end quarterback production. I mean, top level quarterback production with a variety of different quarterbacks, which is kind of cool too. So But with the owner, I don't need to go through bit by bit. Let's just say it's just for me, it's his lack of integrity, and that's always been an issue for me. Is integrity. Telling the truth is important. Um, Running a business in in an honest and earnest and functional manner is important to me. I see other teams around the league doing that, like in Detroit right now. It's capturing my imagination. Like in Washington D.C. right now, it's capturing my imagination. There are teams, and in Houston, it's capturing my imagination big time. The way they've gone about it, and not that those franchises have been paragons of integrity ever before, but they've gotten it right now. And the corrupt aspects of their past seem to be in the rearview mirror. So we've got that issue with Bidwell, who seems more interested in making money than, and he fashions himself as a football guy this came out in the Terry McDonough trial, where he said, yeah, I make several picks a year, and I know it. He said with Robert Camdice, I'm a high judge of character, and he fits the bill. I mean, there are things going back with his involvement, particularly in first-round picks, that are really, really dubious, and have backfired on him. And it was interesting when the pick was announced for Marvin Harrison Jr. It was interesting how Monti and Gannon had this huge, bro hug, and slaps on the back, and then when Bidwell went to hug Monti, it was kind of like a little chill in the air, and I was wondering what that was all about. Because I'm convinced if you're syncing this up, Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't the sync guy in that draft for them offensively. He just wasn't as good as he's, potentially great as he's going to be in the NFL. There were, as I said before, there were stronger fits if you want to keep, the offense that you're running at a top level. So, and then with Monti, what mystifies me is I got excited when we hired him because I thought, wow, coming from the Patriots all those years, he's going to, this could be really good for the Cardinals. Except that from day one, it's like he hadn't learned shit from the Patriots. Nothing. I mean, so many of his moves are so mystifying to me. Starting with Jonathan Gannon. I don't know what in the world he sees in that guy. I don't know why, given the choice of other coaches. And it strikes me very profoundly that coming from the Patriots, there were options for Ossenfort to hire former Patriots with head coaching experience, like Brian Flores, like Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien would have been a great choice. Bill O'Brien would have been the first quarterback to ride Kyler's butt and hold him accountable in ways that no coach has before. That would have been interesting to watch. Bill O'Brien, Deshaun Watson was a mess without Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien, turned Deshaun Watson into an MVP candidate. There were guys like that, but it became obvious to me that here's the hierarchy of the Cardinals. Michael Bidwell never hires a guy, a GM with experience, because he wants a GM he can control. So Monti comes in. Does he hire a guy with experience, NFL experience, to put the team in the best possible hands? No, he has handpicked a guy who's somewhat controversial, a guy who was not liked by the Eagles fans in Philly, and had to break NFL tampering rules and lose a draft, swap third round draft picks, which was from early in the round to late in the round. All that was like a cry of desperation to me. And then it just seemed obvious that Monti wanted a guy he could control, figuring, first year head coach, he could do a Steve Keim on. It's just this cycle of decision making that was so troubling to me. And then, with his first draft, I mean, if you hire a defensive minded head coach, and Gannon did the same thing that he did in Philadelphia. His first year there, he told the Philadelphia brass, don't worry about adding to the defense. I can work with what we've got. If you got to fix the offense in the offseason, do it. But, I mean, Gannon had a loaded defense there. Let's be honest. And they didn't have a great year that year, his first year, but then they added to it with Reddick and stuff. And they had all sorts of really good players going back, and they re-signed their cornerbacks and everything. And then he had a really good year his second year, of course, until the Super Bowl. But, and ironically or coincidentally, that happened, while he was allowing to be tampered with by the Cardinals and taking calls. And, and I've said this from Cardinal fans ad nauseum. If he had done that to us, if we were in the Super Bowl, I mean, we got mad enough that one of our assistant, Russ Grimm, was eating a hot dog watching Bruce Springsteen at the halftime show when the Cardinals were in the Super Bowl. Imagine if one of our coordinators, we found out later, was doing a song and dance with another team during Super Bowl weeks. We'd be bullshit. So, I mean, when someone tells you who he is, believe him. What Jonathan Gannon is a guy who's willing to turn his back on his own football team. And even worse, on his own players. I mean, I watched Jason Kelce retire sobbing that they lost that Super Bowl and saying it's the most regretful moment of his career and had to go out on that note. Sobbing. How can you look a player like that in the eye and say, I didn't give you everything I had for those 2 weeks because, hey, after all, there's only 32 jobs out there. And I mean, the total irony is that they just waited till after the Super Bowl. Anything could have happened, and it could have been legit. But it just irks me to no end. And here's the other thing about Gannon and Ossenfort. How do you walk into that building knowing it's torn apart by a drama queen quarterback and immediately proclaim, this is our guy? I wouldn't take the job without him, without at least seeing it for your own eyes first. And without at least, what's the fairest thing to do when you walk in a building? Just say, I'm going to evaluate everything, every player. I'm going to approach this with an open mind. We'll see who we like, who we don't, and we'll act accordingly. They didn't do that. And they knew that this was going to really, really upset a lot of the players. But then it was that point, it was you either fish or cut bait. So what they had to do is trim, wipe out any of the players that they thought weren't on board with Kyler being tabbed as the guy coming in by the new administration and new head coaching staff. The head coaching staff. I just wish, in retrospect, that's the thing you do. You walk in and say, I don't know anybody yet. I haven't worked with anybody yet. So I want to start, from scratch, give them the benefit of the doubt, a clean slate, give me a clean slate and my staff, and we'll get to work. How does Monti Ossenfort condone then Gannon hiring two coordinators who never coordinated a play in their lives, the youngest coaching staff in the NFL, and task them in year one with the opportunity to tank games. I mean, it's a compromise of integrity on every level. Every level. I mean, how do you look players in the eye? And week after week, Gannon in the press conference, everything's hunky dory and everything. People saying, "Oh, Gannon's like the next Dan Campbell." That is so beyond the pale, farcical. I mean, Dan Campbell, when his players lose, is a physical mess, an emotional mess, because he cares about them so much. He can't stand the pain in their eyes, and he absorbs it. His press conferences after they lose, you can see he is crestfallen. Look at Gannon after this embarrassing show in Green Bay. Oh, I thought we competed. It's like, oh, all this, like, it never seemed, he's like Teflon. There is no urgency in that coach whatsoever. And if people think they're playing for him, that's a ha-ha moment. Because were they playing for him in Green Bay last week? All right. I mean, the players are playing for themselves. And the culture was there with Budda Baker and James Conner, two bell cow leaders. And the way they've handled Budda Baker is another story unto itself. But, and here's the thing about Gannon with me, too. His calling card is where he cut his teeth in the NFL was that as a cornerbacks coach. How has the cornerback play been in Arizona for 2 years? I mean, I watch them. They're not fundamentally sound. Their prize free agent cornerback was just textbook awful this week. And he's been awful since day one in Sean Murphy-Bunting. He's not doing anything right fundamentally. He's not showing an urgency himself to recover. Everything about cornerback play is recovering because you're going to get beat on the first step. So you have to leverage and recover. This guy doesn't do it, or he's not doing it here. He did it for Todd Bowles, who was a defensive back, a cornerback coach, cut his teeth that way. He's not doing it here under Gannon. All right. So why is that? Why is it? You could see if the fundamentals are right, but they're not. They're wrong. All right. And then, you don't have guys getting to the football the way a real cornerback should. At least getting pass breakups. Saw Starling Thomas get one. I was hip hooray. And the other, ironically, the only other guy to get a pass breakup was Julian Quara from the edge, who was playing out in the flat and almost had a chance to intercept that pass from Jordan Love. So, so if you hire a defensive coach and the defense is awful, as it has been, but then there's this sort of like, it's like Gannon's so kind of, glib about the whole thing. It's like he feels like he has no worries in the world, like he's playing with house money. Like, oh, of course they're going to give me, all the time it takes. Like we can just, build this thing a little by a little, and we'll just talk up how hard we're playing and being competitive. That was not a competitive football game at all in Green Bay, just as it wasn't at all at home against the Commanders. And, and how can they, the good thing is that defense has had 2 second half shutouts. But why doesn't that carry over at all? In the first half, they've been awful in it pretty much every game, except the Rams game. And, who took care of that was Budda Baker. Budda Baker single-handedly shooting the gaps, stifled the Rams' vaunted running attack in ways we've never seen before. And good for the coaches for him. I've heard Budda has been given his own input as to how to attack these teams. That was brilliant. And I'm glad they let him do it because it was stunning to watch. But we haven't been a 60-minute defense since. And, it's been a tale of two halves. So and Monty's here's the thing too. Will Monty and Gannon track top free agents? It's obvious. No, they won't. I mean, if you're a top defensive free agent now, you're going to go to Arizona? I mean, really?
Hey, Hassan
Go,
Reddick's available again. Just saying, he's gotten permission to seek a trade.
yeah, but I'm going to bet you that Bibble won't want it. He don't want to pay the money, and that Monty doesn't really care that much about Reddick because I bet you JG is like, he probably has, even though Reddick had a career year for him, like JG, like I said, there's no urgency
Well, the
in
the
him.
price tag just dropped on Mr. Hassan Reddick because while we've been on the air, breaking news came in that the Jets traded for Devontae Adams and they took his entire contract too. So they're going to be paying the entire remainder of his, let me do the math real quick, $69 million contract for the next two and a
Wow.
half years. So I think there's now
What
a
did they,
sense of urgency to get off that deal.
right. What did they get for him?
A conditional draft pick that will fall somewhere between 50 and 80, probably. So it's a third round pick, but it can go up to a second if either Adams makes all pro, which probably isn't going to happen this year, or
Right.
he's on the active roster for an AFC championship game.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Probably a
Yeah, I think
third round pick.
the writing's on the wall for Hassan.
Yeah.
But
And
now he's got
after
Drew
that,
Rosenhaus.
yeah, after they announced the trade, they said that the Jets have given Reddick and Rosenhaus permission to seek a trade.
Right.
So they are
Right.
ready to get out of him, even if it
Right.
costs them less draft compensation.
I'll predict Atlanta for that.
But to your point, like
Maybe even go ahead.
no, I was just saying to your point, regardless of whether he ends up a Cardinal or Atlanta, that's the route the Cardinals have to take. They have to take Reddick, who has a reputation of being one of the great
Right.
calamities of this 10-year run with the Cardinals because they didn't know how to use him properly, and he goes
Right.
somewhere else and has this incredible career. So even that, as great of a player as Reddick is now, even that is an indictment of the Cardinals that they're now giving up more draft compensation and more money to do right by a player who they had in the building for 4 years, spent a first round pick on, was clearly talented. I still remember to this day he just crushed the combine, and it didn't matter because they put him at the wrong position for 4 years.
Right. Yep. So, um, here's what I think is going to happen this season. And I hope it doesn't. And I hope and pray they do not trade Buda Baker in the slight chance that somehow we, move on from Ossenfort and Gannon, at least from Gannon as head coach, and this youngest coaching staff ever. And then the sort of temerity to not hire, senior assistants who could help out with this is just mind-boggling to me. But it just goes to show too, it's this whole hierarchy of power. Like, Bidwell wants a GM he can control. The GM wants a head coach he can control. The head coach wants assistants he can totally control and have seniority over. All right. So that's the in sync thing that the Cardinals have going for them now. The problem is competency at each of the levels. I mean, Monty's done some good things, but let me go back to this point, and I'm going to ask Kyle to put up a graphic in a second. How do you hire a defensive-minded head coach, and you're sitting there with Will Anderson Jr. at the top of a draft that you have a chance to draft, knowing that your current roster lacks a bona fide edge rusher, and you can get one of the best to come out of college ever, right? And you can get the guy I thought was lights out as a prospect in the second round in Brian Branch. Did you see what Brian Branch did Sunday for the Lions? This guy is Brian Branch is a tremendous modern football player where you've got a guy who can win games, defending the slot and the box simultaneously in ways that few people can. So, if you want to put up that graphic, look at what could have been. Now it's easy in retrospect, to do this kind of thing. I recognize that, and it's hypothetical, obviously, and this is imaginary, obviously, now, and it's after the fact. But I don't think you heard it from me for a whole offseason, Will Anderson and Brian Branch. So, you can give me some credit for that. Those are the guys that I were hyping big time, knowing that we were going to need them. And here's the thing that bothered me was the notion that, let's make Kyler comfortable first. All right. No, now let's, and Cardinal fans are going to agree with me on this because we're writing about it all the time now. No, what would make Kyler the most comfortable is finally have a freaking defense that it's worth its weight in salt. I mean, this defense was awful last year. It's in two halves away from being completely awful this year. I mean, when is that going to stop? And here you have this golden opportunity. Look at what you could have done defensively in this draft. And would the Cardinals be in the same condition now that they'd be in? With those guys, tempo setters, you got one guy on the front line in Anderson, and a guy on the second level in Brian Branch, who are dominant players to add to what we had. I mean, the only player the Cardinals have who comes anywhere near either of those is Budda Baker. And what a tandem Budda Baker and Brian Branch would have been. Wow. I mean, and Branch, he's safety but slash slot corner. So, he's so versatile. I mean, that's what you love him for, is slot corner. He had 2 interceptions, by the way, for the Lions, who were really disappointed to lose their stud, Aiden Hutchinson to the broken fibula. That's another team maybe to look out for Reddick, who might agree to go there on some sort of a deal to compete for a Super Bowl. So wouldn't rule that out either. So
I think Branch also punched out a fumble in that game too.
He did, and he got one of the 2 game balls. I mean, look at the Lions too, what they're getting out of Jared Goff. I mean, anyone who could say, Kyler's better than Jared Goff. No freaking way.
No way. I can't believe I'm saying this in the Lord's year 2024. Jared Goff is a legitimate MVP candidate. Jared Goff might be one of the MVPs of the NFL.
Yeah, and he's got glaring weaknesses, but the coaches do a great job of masking those and putting him in situations. Here's the thing. I bet if you go back and count over the last 2 years how many bootlegs and waggles Jared Goff has versus Kyler Murray, the numbers would be staggeringly in the favor of Jared Goff. I mean, look at him. He's, he doesn't have the wheels that Kyler has, but he's really good at it. And because he does it a lot. And, when he's out in the flat, there's Laporta breaking free. He's got him. He's got Amon-Ra St. Brown breaking free over the middle. He's got, James Williams, the speedster. I mean, that offense is clicking with him. But they took him in that trade and everyone thought they were crazy. And look at him now. I mean, they worked him through the issues, and now he's delivering big time.
Well,
So
and the foundation of all of it is that offensive line, right? If the reason he goes 100% in the first half against the Cardinals or 100% against the Seahawks is that what do the
right,
Seahawks and Cardinals have? Difficulty pass rushing. What do the Lions have? Uh, excellent offensive line. He's got all day to sit back and wait for someone to get open, and his strength is accuracy. He knows how to put
right,
the ball there if you give him 4.5 seconds. So
right.
when he's had the most success is teams that have an inability to pass rush with 4 or even 5 and plenty of time to then make those reads and make those throws.
Yeah, and I mean, it's this dream thing that dream possibility or idea that actually was laid out on paper by me and others. I mean, I love Clark Phillips. He's balling it in Atlanta right now. You want guys who can cover the slot, and we need multiple of them. So landing Branch and Phillips would have been a boon right there, and set the table to where you don't have to draft five cornerbacks in two drafts. I still don't get that. And then right now they're not playing their best cover guy, in my opinion, who adds the most to the coverage is the Rabbit. And he had this inspirational game that helped us shut out the 49ers the second half. Had the second highest game grade of any Cardinal this season at 91.2. Gardeck had a 91.9 in his 3-sack game. Special kids, special talent, and they don't play him at all in Green Bay. I mean, this is the mind fucking games they do with these players, which they've done with Catrell Clark, and it's intolerable because it's stupid. It's just frankly stupid to set back guys like this who bring this kind of talent. And I mean, look at the rest. I mean, obviously, I'm cherry picking with Puka Nacua there because everybody would do that now. I mean, so don't fault me. He was there. I took him. But this is what my point is. This is what could have been done, and then you sign a quarterback from the beginning. You don't go Colt McCoy is going to be not at that point. It wasn't Colt. If Cliff was coming back, and his relationship with Colt and everything, and Colt was healthier, then maybe. But all things were against Colt McCoy, his health, his age, and a new regime. And, it was important to move on. Why they couldn't get Gardner Minshew, who was in with the Eagles. Instead, Stenchen gets him in Indy and as a really good bridge guy. They should have made a move there to get a quarterback so they could have hit the ground running, because you never know in the NFL when you play the games to win, which you're supposed to do, if you have any integrity at all, and if you care at all about your players who are busting their butts off out there on the field, and taking the lumps and making the sacrifices to win, you do it wholeheartedly, and you don't rule anything out. Like this year, everybody thought, it'll be a rebuilding year for the Commanders, except their front office, their head coach, their coordinators, who, by the way, are experienced, have said, heck with that. We got games to play. We're going to try to win them. We're going to get out there and go try to win them. What a novel idea. All right. And look at that. And same thing with the Texans the year before. How they got these beautiful young quarterbacks. I have total young quarterback envy going in me right now. I want, my team to have one of those. We had one in Kyler Murray. About halfway through his tenure here, he showed us it was all about his bag. And, at a time when he had quit on the team already by refusing to go back into that Rams game, which for those of us who've played football, you never do that to your teammates, ever. And that is just, and that And here's the other thing that bugs me about Kyler is I will always think of him as sitting alone on the bench while Buda Baker is being loaded onto a gurney with the rest of his teammates taking a knee. That is an image that I cannot expunge from my mind. And I don't care if anyone told him to do it. You say, no, I'm going to be there for my brother. I'm going to be there for my teammate. I'm going to go over and pat him on the shoulder, do something. I'm going to take the knee with everybody else. And, you know, I just took all that so hard. It was hard to comprehend because I was the biggest Kyler fan coming out of Oklahoma. I wanted him badly. And to this day, kudos to, I think I was right with the talent. But as far as what his priorities were, I didn't understand well enough to know then. And I don't think I had a chance to. All I saw was a great Heisman Trophy season, and I saw him battle his butt off against Alabama and really try to come back in that game. And I thought that spoke volumes to his character, and how locked in he was, and how overwhelmed he was in the first half of that game by an overwhelming defense. So, yeah, I mean, so what do you do? Here's my cut. Give me some advice now. If the cage opens, I mean, right now I can't even fathom stomaching another year of Ossenfort. We're going to have to be stuck with Bill Will, but Ossenfort, Gannon, and Murray. If the doors open, should I get out?
Well, this is an interesting situation because you've been an Arizona Cardinals fan since what is it, 1963?
Correct.
So from 1964 until what is it, 2008? Or yeah, let's say 2008. So that's 45 years of Cardinal football. You got what, two playoff wins that entire time? So you've gone to hell and back with this football team, and not necessarily even like, oh, these were devastating, like just years of like, we're not even in it, we don't even have a shot
Right.
going into the start of the season. So looking at the last 3 years, I guess we could start it really at the 9-1 stretch when it all falls apart, the back half of 2021. But specifically the last 3 years, I think the thing that stinks so much is not that it fell apart. It's just that they're so far behind the eight ball and trying to chase it down, right? Like,
Right.
so going back to week one of 2022, so that's 2.5 seasons ago now. Cardinals 10 wins, 30 losses, tied for worst record in the NFL over the last 2.5 seasons with the Carolina Panthers,
Right.
who everyone acknowledges is just a devastating, poorly run organization. Panthers fans have pretty much given up on that team at this point, pretty much. You could go back to when they were 9-1. So when the losing streak begins, 12 total wins. That's second fewest in the NFL, only behind the Panthers. From the Packers game in 2021, which was the AJ Green, didn't turn around. From that point onward, 14 total wins for the Cardinals, second fewest in the NFL,
Right.
only ahead of the Carolina Panthers. So it feels like they're so far behind the eight ball. And I said this 2 weeks ago, is like the losses aren't necessarily the measuring stick when you're talking about such a dramatic rebuild. But the thing that's more frustrating is that you're not really seeing the signs of improvement. The
Right.
defense is now 23rd in the league, but a lot of that is predicated on the final 3 quarters of that Niner game, right? The improvement on defense is being held up by how well the Niners played. So I wouldn't go so far as to say the season is over and done with, but you're not seeing those signs of improvement to make it feel like what Dan Campbell did with Detroit, right? Because Dan Campbell started 3 17-1 or something, or 3-19-1.
Right.
It was like a really devastating start. And then they
Right.
immediately picked it up and turned it around because the signs of improvement were there, even though they were losing these one score games. You're just seeing the Cardinals
Right.
get run out of the building in a lot lot of these weeks
Right.
against very good offenses. I mean, the Buffalo is a very good offense. Detroit is a very good offense. Um, Green Bay is a very good offense. Like, I don't
Right.
want to, put Washington is the number 2 offense in the NFL. So, but when they play these very good offenses, they're just getting blown out of the building, and that's a defensive indictment. And you could turn that back to Jonathan Gannon pretty quickly and say this is an indictment of how we're performing on defense. But I
Right.
think going back to when they were first hired, to your original question about the Gannon Ossenfort-Kyler combo, it's like Gannon said at the beginning. He's all in on Kyler Murray, and if one's gonna go, I think the second is probably not that far behind, for better or for worse. I mean, it's not to say that this is the end all be all, but even it's crazy to say it. Even Aaron Rodgers only got 2 coaches with the Green Bay Packers. Like, at a certain point, teams just don't stick it out that long. Baker Mayfield, for all the offensive coordinators he went through, he only got 2 coaches in Cleveland before the third coach said, you know what, I kind of want to pick my own quarterback. And so I don't really know exactly where it goes from here, but Lord knows you've taken a lot of narcotics or been through a lot over your 60 years of rooting for the Cardinals. And I don't know if it gets better. I don't know if it gets worse, but my advice to anyone who is going through a narcotic fan base situation is you can always quit that narcotic. There is always a moment to be able to quit that narcotic. And sometimes that just means emotionally investing a little bit less and see how it starts to feel, right? It doesn't have to be cold turkey. It doesn't have to be we're stopping rooting for this team altogether, but we can just stop emotionally investing a little bit, especially when you talk about poor ownership. I mean, poor ownership, like the Cardinals have, is almost a death sentence in this league because even the competent owners struggle to compete in this league. Even the Bob Crafts of the world sometimes don't have the answers of how to turn around a difficult situation. And so it's about competent people in power putting the right people in positions to succeed. The Cardinals clearly don't have that with the Bidwills of it all. I mean, we've seen that over years. So that starts right at the top. That incompetent ownership, or especially poor work environments, when you talk about everything with the Terry McDonoughs and all that stuff, that makes it so that even when you put people in positions to succeed, they're not able to perform at their best because you've put them in poor. Even when you've put them in power, you haven't put them in position to succeed. It's a real difficult thing, and this is the thing that stinks from that standpoint. Also, is I should be someone who roots more for the Cardinals. We've been doing this show for what, 4 years now. I've
Yeah.
watched almost every Cardinals game every week. I should be someone who is a bit emotionally invested in the Cardinals, and it's just never clicked for me because one, I'm so tortured from being a San Diego
Right.
sports fan growing up, but they've
Yeah.
they've given me very little reason to get excited or invested, right? So it's
Right.
just never happened because I look at this whole situation and say it's
Right.
just what is worth it? Why
Right.
what am I gaining in my life from being emotionally invested in the results of the Arizona Cardinals? That's the
Right.
saddest part of it for me. I don't know if you should wean off the Cardinals or take a step back, but for
Right.
me it's sad because I should really care about this team, and it's never checked those boxes
Yeah.
for me because they've just never given me reason to.
Well, and you have an added incentive, not only in me, but your bro.
That's the other part. My brother, after the Chargers left, my brother, also from San Diego, he was an Arizona Cardinals fan. That was his NFC team
Yeah.
for years. He was a Charger fan, but the Cardinals were his
Yeah.
NFC team, so he just jumped in on the Cardinals. And even he's kind of like, yeah, that's not happening. I'll still watch the Cardinals week to week, but it's not it. It's just
Right.
not good. It's not
Right.
going in the right direction.
So, I mean, things Cardinals related have been so easy for me to predict, and it's interesting to me that I still don't have much cred on the board with a lot of people that are renting the birds, even though virtually everything I predicted has come true. But that's fine. It makes for good, debates and arguments and this and that.
Well, part of it too is
But
the end result is bad. Your predictions are coming true, but it's because they're bad results also.
well, they're also common sense predictions. Like going back to Patrick Peterson in 2015, or actually in 14, I said the Cardinals will never win anything of significance, like an NFC Championship or Super Bowl with Patrick Peterson on the roster. People thought I was crazy. And the vitriol I got in return for that, and he was, Peterson was the greatest thing. He said, no, you can't have players playing on double standards. It just doesn't lead to winning football. And I think he's the single reason why the Honey Badgers stopped playing hard. Because he saw, hey, if Pat doesn't have to tackle anyone, why should I have to do his dirty business? And it has trickle effects. I said the same thing about DeAndre Hopkins. I was one of the only ones who was, leery about the trade because I saw what he did to the Texans. I have a similar feeling about him as I did about Gannon. It's like the Texans bent over backwards for that guy, and there was just there's nothing grateful about him. It was just all about him. He also made it impossible for the coaches because he wouldn't practice during the week. And that creates a double standard too. If you don't practice, and because you know your own body and what it can take, which is such a bullshit thing. All along, Steve Keim perpetuated this and that. It's just the double standard is not going to help you win. You need guys fully committed, bought in together, and you can't have prima donnas, you can't have divas, you can't have any of that stuff because you're not going to win championships with it. And so it's so easy to predict. But, look at the different people saying Dan Campbell and here's, JG is following. No, look at what Dan Campbell did. He put his offense in the hands of Ben Johnson. And then he put his defense in the hands of Aaron Glenn. These guys have been around the block, and they're really good at what they do. So, Drew Petzing and Nick Rallis are bright young coaches who've got potentially bright futures. It's just going to take a while. And I don't know how you continue to lose like this or be so inconsistent and not show up weeks on whole halves and stuff like that and still have a coordinator's job in the NFL. It just doesn't work that way. Plus, look at who you're up against. Now, to Nick Rallis' credit, he's come up with 2 great games against NFC West folks. And I think that the Seahawks games are going to be defining moments for this Cardinals team. Because if they get swept by the Seahawks again, who, by the way, just added another defensive tackle via trade, they're making moves. We're not doing shit. We're activating Zay Jones, who's been out for 6 weeks. Feels like Hopkins all over again. Not a big fan of that whole ordeal either, but it may come at an auspicious time if Marvin Harrison Jr. is out for the game. And now I'm worried about him. 6 games in, he's already had his first NFL concussion. He's not terrifically keen about going over the middle to begin with. I don't know what this means moving forward. It has me nervous. But, it comes down to putting your players, giving them the best. Now, I'd be fine with, if Petzing and Rallis had, veteran coaches helping them. Like what would really be great for Petzing is to get a passing game coordinator. Because obviously from the Stefanski system and from Petzing, he doesn't know how to scheme guys open. I mean, Cliff is one of the best people doing it on the planet, believe it or not. I mean, people look at the tree that DeAndre Hopkins ran, and I'm going to tell you this right now. DeAndre Hopkins ran that tree because that's the tree he wanted to run. And he was, and he wasn't in practice long enough during weeks to diversify his role as much as they could have. But look at the way Cliff is now. There's an anecdote, like in his third year with the Cardinals, was that J.J. Watt and some others were going like, "Hey, Cliff, wow, you're getting guys open left and right," and he said, "That's what I do. I get guys open," and he does. He has his whole career, but it's not happening in this offense, and it makes you wonder what's going to be the direction now. Now, if they have, Marvin Harrison Jr., they're bringing in Zay Jones. What are you going to do now that you're now, trying to, how do you incorporate a functional, when was the last time Kyler threw for 300 yards in a game? I don't think it's been any time we can look back in recent memory.
Let's
So
find out right
yeah.
about now.
All right.
Okay.
So I'll finish my thought on that while you try to find that out. Meanwhile, all these other quarterbacks are just, if you look at the Green Bay game this week, you look at both quarterbacks, and let's say you have no affinity for either team. I mean, is there really any comparison to what Jordan Love was doing on the field to Kyler? There's none. I mean, Love was a superior quarterback from first play of the game to the last. I mean, it wasn't even close. So, and it should have been. I mean, Kyler's got the years of experience now over him and everything else. And, Kyler came out flat in that game. It just was, but before you know it, it's 14-0, and now you're playing catch up. So what do you have there?
Well, this is kind of funny. We're still looking for the answer because 2024, his highest passing yardage totals was 266 against the Rams.
Right.
Last year, he did not have a game over 256 yards in the six
Right.
games that he played. Obviously, limited action. Going
Right.
back to 2022. Okay, so the last game Kyler Murray had over 300 passing yards was October 30th, 2022 against the Minnesota Vikings. He was 31 for 44 for 326 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 95.5. That
Nice. I
was,
remember that game.
if I'm
I remember
counting
that
this,
game. That was a dogfight in that game. Kyler put up a good fight.
if I'm counting
I think
this out, that is,
we lost that game though. It was at Minnesota, I believe. And
yes, it was at
yeah,
Minnesota. That is
what was the
16
score?
consecutive games. It was 26 to
Yeah,
34.
yeah. So frustrating, but Kyler put up a fight that game. That was really good. But we're not that kind of team anymore. We're not putting up big numbers. I mean, the Rams game was an anomaly thus far. You'd like to see more of it, but they had a really good plan that day, and somehow we haven't seen the plan since. Um, but getting back to putting the players in the right hands. I mean, we need some of that. We need someone to come in and show how to scheme receivers open better than what they're doing. I mean, I don't see typical motions. I don't see motion off rubs. I don't see enough pick plays. I don't see enough rub plays. I don't see enough stacks. I don't see enough trips where you can do multiple routes out of the trips. I don't see sprint motion ever. All right. So, I mean, there are ways you can scheme this thing that, other teams are doing really well. And Cardinals are seeing it on tape every week from some of the teams they're playing. But whatever's going on, it's just, what's with this fake handoff to Connor and then throw him the screen. I mean, it worked once, but and here they're trying it again in the second half, and it gets, nearly intercepted, and then he just catches the ball and gets hammered down. I mean, it's just agonizing, the repetitiveness, the lack of creativity, and imagination that so many teams seem to have that we don't. And, and on defense, here's one, if I'm coaching the Cardinals defensive backs before Green Bay, so they could have defended in Green Bay. Like I said before, the whole key about defense of coverage is leverage to one side and then recovery, because catch up, because typically you're going to get beat off the first move, and now you have to have the urgency and the foot speed to catch up and get in a position to jump the route. Okay, so I saw twice in this game guys at the goal line defending their men in close proximity, and on neither occasion did either defender plane out to try to dive and knock the ball out, or at least distract. It was Chris Barnes against the running back. He was right on his hip, could have launched out, and tried to, get to the football. Do everything you can. This is the sense of urgency I'm talking about. Do everything you can to get to the football. Dive out for it and make yourself a menace. Same thing with Garrett Williams, who was tiptoeing around, and the pass was coming to Dobbs, and he was in a position to plane out. And with his length, he could have gotten a hand on the football. You're just not playing with a sense of urgency that you want to see from defensive backs, and a sense of aggressiveness. And with how often do they look back for the football? Look at the deep pass that Murphy Bunting gave up, where he just got turned around and looked lost. I mean, what's going on? That ball was in the air a long time. He could have been able to defend. You want to see a sense of urgency there from the players, and better techniques, and on their coverage, from the get-go. I still don't understand, if you're playing up in press coverage, why you don't try to knock this receiver off the route from the beginning. I don't understand that. Because if you're right there, you ought to do it, especially on tight ends too. I mean, disrupt timing is so important. So, but and I'm going to wrap it up with this. Here's what I think is going to happen. And I don't want it to happen, but I think it's going to happen. Because there's a Mike Vrabel out there who has ties to Ossenfort. Now, my worry about that is that, for whatever reason, Monti wants control over a younger head coach who he can, kind of preside over, and wouldn't want to take on someone as dynamic and alpha as Mike Vrabel. And again, it's like, do you really want to put your players in the hands of the best coaches? I mean, with the Patriots connection, talk about the sink. I mean, Mike Vrabel won't come in and, he'll bring with him experienced coordinators. Plus, he'll run the defense himself, unlike Gannon's choosing not to do. So he's out there. There are other intriguing possibilities out there. Belichick's out there, for crying out loud. So, I mean, there's going to be some interesting guys out there, or candidates out there, moving forward. But here's what I think is going to happen. I think, given the schedule and everything, this will continue in this pattern. Every now and then, we're going to get a stunning game where we're like, oh, yes, and maybe we'll wind up winning 2 games in a row finally at some point this season. But whatever they win down the stretch is going to be enough for fans to go, yeah, well, it really was a 3-year rebuild, and you know, Gannon deserves another year and this and that. And I'm afraid that if that's the case, they're not going to be able to hire any. They've already shown they're not going to be able to hire any premier free agents. They're going to have to try to gamble on middle of the road guys that they probably have to overpay to get them in there, like this has been happening. Look at the free agent signings again that Ossenfort did this year, and really the only good one to date is Mac Wilson. I mean, Evan Brown was a good one too. I got to say that, but the tandem of the three highest paid defensive guys have all had that down years, and Murphy Bunting might be injured now. I don't know, but Justin Jones is out for the season, and Bilal Nichols not getting it done. So, I mean, he's not terrible, but he's really not. I mean, put it this way: Naquan Jones played this week. Couldn't help but notice him all over the field. He's out hustling. Now, he played in the preseason. He came in game shape, which, when you treat players like fat cats and give them the red carpet and say, you don't have to play in preseason games, and, you guys you just kick back. It's no wonder they're getting injured. I mean, you're not in game shape. Jones didn't come in game shape start of this season. It was noticeable right away. Same thing with Nichols. I mean, the decision to just say nobody's playing and none of the starters are playing, and you're trying to build something and you're making decisions like that. Decision to call off the last 2 days of mandatory mini camp. I mean, I just want a coach and staff that wants to do the job the way it's supposed to be done. I mean, is that a lot to ask? I don't want to be surprised with, okay, taking the team off the field for 2 days. I mean, when you were coming off a 4-win season and you have all these young players you drafted, you're going to have them indoors behind computers or in meeting rooms instead. It just makes no sense to me. And it's just, except if you want to earn an A grade as a head coach in the NFL these days, because one of the two criteria, which has nothing to do with winning football games, and everything to do with making the players comfortable, is time management for the players. So it's like a teacher in high school saying, hey, kids, no homework this week. Woo! If they put a grade on a teacher that week, what are you going to give them? A+. It just ticks me off. But I think they're going to do enough, and this is what I'm worried about, is that to buy another year, meanwhile we have, there's going to be guys out there, rare opportunities to land as a head coach. I mean, if we landed Mike Vrabel as a head coach, oh my God, I'd be out of my mind excited. But I just think these guys are over their heads. The GM is making, there's no Patriot-like decisions being made from him. It's just mind-boggling to me. And I mean, I just can't believe he was in the same organization. I mean, would a Bill Belichick team take 2 days off of mandatory minicamp? I mean, please. I mean, if Bill Belichick could come to Arizona, which I don't think he'd ever do because he wouldn't want to work for Bidwell. I mean, I'd be out of my mind, because we'd play defense. I guarantee you, we'd see defense like we've never seen in the last 20 years if he was there. Same thing with Vrabel. That guy coaches up defense big time. We would have had a huge defense with Brian Flores. Just couldn't hire him because can't get him to tank. Unbelievable. So anyway, that's what I think is going to happen. It's going to bum me out something fierce. And in the interim, if they trade Buda Baker, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. I mean,
That might be the
he's
moment that they give you to quit the narcotic. That might be the moment to jump off.
right. I mean, I'm still going to cover the team. I'm going to still try to be objective and as open minded as I can. I mean, people are saying, well, you've already made up your mind now. But this is 2 years of this stuff. And it's built on sand. I mean, if the foundation was more solid and had integrity and honesty and wasn't such a like scam job, all this talk, and being just woefully inconsistent. And you just don't know what to get from week to week. Are they going to show up in the first half? Are they going to show up in the second half? Are they going to, it's just a guessing game. And I got fed up this week because I really got my hopes up for the first time during the last 2 years. And I was hoping maybe I'm wrong about, could I possibly be wrong? And in my heart, I'm like, no, you're not wrong, but maybe something's happening here. Something's brewing in Arizona, the way Mac Wilson's been talking. All right. Something's brewing. All right. Maybe something's brewing after that 49ers shocking win in the second half. And then we come out and watch that. So that's where I said, this is abusive. I mean, you get your hopes up to watch that. I mean, no carryover whatsoever. The defense just bending and penalties all over the place. Offense flat. Um, throwing a 3-yard pass so that Marvin Harrison Jr. gets concussed. I mean, the most stupidest play call I've seen in a while. I don't know why. Now, if that's open, there's no safety bearing on him, then you throw the ball, sure. But that was just, leading Marvin Harrison Jr. into the Lions' den. And, they paid a price for it. It's just unfortunate. I mean, if you can't find other ways to scheme him open than that, I'm sorry, you got problems. So I'm worried that's what's going to happen, and we got to sit through another year of these kind of ups and downs and the occasional highs, then getting back the next week getting zapped by such an embarrassing defeat. I mean, you wonder what was going on during the week. And that's the thing about the Cardinals as an organization. Whatever success they've had, they don't seem to be able to sustain. And through a series of poor decision making. Like the year that, Warner took us to a Super Bowl and they can't get they try to nickel and dime him on a contract the next year. It's one of the stupidest freaking things I've ever seen, to where he's got to go to San Francisco to leverage a deal. That was just, and he said later that really took the wind out of his sails, and I don't blame him. I mean, it's real nickeling and diming. It was just ridiculous. So we have a history of all that. We can talk about that another time. But with this coaching staff, consistency has not been a factor at all. And it's been a carryover from last year. Like one game, they'll come out and play great. And then, the next game, you're not even watching what you think is the same team. So, I'm not just making this up. I'm just asking myself why get so emotionally attached, continue to get emotionally attached to a owner, GM, head coach, and quarterback that I just don't trust and don't have a reason to trust, that they can consistently get the job done and make smart decisions, and that they're linked up. As I was so excited when Monti arrived and said, I'm going to link this whole thing up. Well, the links I see are like breaks in a chain. I don't see it all linked up at all. So that's disturbing to me. I didn't see the the whole coaching decision get linked up the way it could have been. I didn't see the staff get linked up the way it could have been. I haven't seen the personnel linking up. I mean, put it this way: if you're paying these free agents above market value for them to come in, you better have identified them as culture guys, right? It's not happening. It's not happening. They're not bought into anything. They wanted the money, like some of the other guys. I
Yeah, this
mean,
was their one big contract. This is
yeah,
Murphy Bunting's one big contract. Bilal
right.
Nichols was a below average defensive tackle according to PFF ratings, and he got his one big
Yeah,
contract. Is the team that was willing to sign him to their one big contract.
yeah, 7 or 8 mil a year he got, which is pretty good. I mean, and then Jones got 10 a year, and he's never had big production. They both have some ability, but if you can't coach it up, if they're not bringing it, what's the point? You know. So, I mean, offer your advice. I want to hear from Cardinal fans whether you're at that brink too, where I am, and if you're not, tell me what do you see that's hopeful to you? Do you see that somehow it's going to click? Do you see that somehow Kyler's going to get it and he's going to be the top 5 quarterback that the Cardinal fans have been wondering, thinking he was deserving of, or all the time, or top 7 or 8? I mean, right now he's 8th in QBR, which is great, but if you look at other stats, it's not that impressive. He had one really great game, and he saved us with getting himself together down the stretch in the Niners game. So that was awesome. But the other games have been, okay, but not what you would expect from a franchise quarterback, given the weapons that he has and the opportunities. Not quite there. And, what's his cap hit? 50.1.
It's going up. That I
And
know.
it's going up. So, but that's where I am. I was like so fed up. Um, I really gave in to the thought of, um, thinking, wow, maybe something is brewing. And now to see that, it's like, and now we have, of course, the interesting game coming up is the Chargers. um, Two teams that Kyle has really no emotional
Well,
no emotional attachment to
Well,
whatsoever.
I
So
don't
for
know.
you,
The Cardinals, it stinks that I can't get into the Cardinals because I can name every player on the team. I've watched 80% of their games over the last 4 years, and I just, they've given me nothing. Nothing.
see,
It's look,
right,
and here's the thing I'll say to you were asking for advice a second ago. Here's the thing that I can say, and it's really I've been making this joke for years, but it's really true. I am a happier, healthier human being because I don't root for the Chargers.
yeah,
Like I can definitively say I am a healthier,
yeah,
happier person because I don't root for the Chargers anymore.
right,
And sure, I like rooting for good teams now. That's fine. I just can't get emotionally invested like that anymore because it's sports. You should ultimately take that emotional investment and put it to something else because a sports team is not going to deliver that reciprocation that you're looking for. Even the best sports teams aren't going to deliver you that reciprocation like you're feeling
right,
before. Because if you're Kansas
right,
City and you win 3 Super Bowls and go to 6 AFC championships, all of a sudden each one is diminished in value. And for the Cardinal fan, making an NFC championship game has been monumental over the last 15 years. So there's other ups and downs that are going to provide you more emotional reciprocation than rooting for a sports team. But sports are really fun. And it's
right,
really great to have your team and your community, and you're all in it together, and you're trying to get to that ultimate goal that isn't making money or isn't having a successful reputation. It's winning. There's definitive wins and definitive losses, and that's part of what makes sports fun. But uh,
right.
All I can say is you can always quit that narcotic,
Yeah,
and
well,
the Cardinals are one of those organizations.
I'm not a quitter by nature, obviously. I started in 63. But the thought at my age of going through another season with a setup that, in my opinion, has no road to no path to a Super Bowl, which was obviously a dream of my lifetime, is to see the Cardinals win a Super Bowl in terms of professional sports. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably pass out. I mean, if it ever happened, I mean, it just would be. And so part of the allure for me as a Cardinals fan is like the constant thinking I do about how to make the team better, how this team can somehow get it right, you know. And I put a lot of time and investment into that, and I take it as a challenge. Like if you were the GM, what would you do? And I put myself in those shoes. And if you were the coach, what would I do? I'll tell you what I would have done if I were the GM and the head coach back in when Kyler scrubbed his socials. I would have traded him right then. There were suitors. The Colts were heavily involved. Um, and that I would have traded Peterson when he asked for it, and I would have traded Chandler Jones, when he asked for it. I just, number one rule, I want guys who want to be here, be part of the solution moving forward, not part of the problem. And in my mind, Kyler's been more of the problem than the solution throughout his tenure here. And unfortunately, to say that, because like I said, no one was a bigger fan coming in. But I don't like a guy quitting on a team that invested so much in him, gave him the number one pick to throw that, hired a head coach to, suit him, so he could run his college, as facsimile of the offense that he ran at Oklahoma, which didn't end up happening to the fullest degree because Cliff Kingsbury's hands were tied. And that whole arrangement was really screwy. But I would have done that because here's the other thing. When I saw what Colt McCoy could do in Cliff's offense, I thought to myself, boy, think of the other quarterbacks he could get big performances out of. And now he's got one in DC who hit the ground running in ways that Kyler was like that as a rookie. And I'll tell you what, that Commanders roster was in no greater shape than the Cardinals was. And they're both rock bottom of the league. The Cardinals still had Larry Fitzgerald, albeit in his later years, but they still had Rondale Moore. They still had players with talents. James Conner. They still had Will Hernandez. And some guys to work around. So, yeah, I would have gone in a different direction. And the guy I was really wanting, and Kyle can attest to this, was C.J. Stroud. We did a whole episode. Sometime we'll air it, right, Kyle? Called "What If?" Kyler Murray. What if? You remember
It
that?
does it does still exist. I don't
Yeah.
remember what we talked about on that podcast, but it does still exist. Let me see if I can find the date from that. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's let me see.
Um,
Where is it?
that was after during the drama,
Yep,
and
that's
I thought,
June 8th, 2022.
yep.
It's still
And
there. It's still
I
there.
just thought, if I air this now, I could probably lose my whole fan base because people were just so adamant about, you have to sign Kyler, you have to, you have no other choice. I gave every other choice possibilities in the book. Like, you got him for 2 years anyway. You got him with the fifth-year option, and it's not like he's destitute, because he was going to get close to 40 million guaranteed out of those 2 seasons. Just all the arguments. But in that, in that what if segment, I was talking about the two quarterbacks coming up in that draft, in the next draft, and C.J. Stroud being one of them. I was pretty high on. So, and I was also high on Bryce Young, and I don't know what happened to him in Carolina. I thought he came on pretty well at the end there last year, and then this year with a new coach, just hasn't happened. But I think that he could be a pretty decent pro if he gets in the right system with the right coach, and I think he's very coachable. So, and I'm lusting for the day we get a GM who likes Alabama kids. Fortunately for us, we got one in Mac Wilson. But man, do we eschew taking Bama kids in the drafts? It's unbelievable. They have like a stockpile of the best talent every year in college football. And I mean, I would have drafted Will Anderson Jr. I would have drafted Brian Branch. Hands down. I mean, no other. I wouldn't even entertain anyone else. But we just see, and I love the way Belichick cued in on Saban players and Bama kids, Hightower, Damian Harris, goes down Barmore. What a pick he was for them. Christian Barmore. Oh my God. Unfortunately, he's out for the year with blood clots, but he is a baller, that kid. So, I mean, I dream of finally being in a situation where I feel like a level of trust. And the only guy that I trusted in the last coaching staff was Cliff, because I knew his work ethic, I knew his background. I watched pretty much so many of his games, went back and watched. I knew what Cliff was bringing to the table, and I knew I could trust in he would put every ounce of energy and effort and passion and commitment into his job. And he did. And he took us places and then got the shaft. But he was the only one I really trusted. Vance Joseph, I didn't trust. I think he was just gunning for the job, and he had one good year out of four. And it coincided with J.J. Watt being there. It was tough to look up and down. Sean Kugler, I mean, yeah, he was gunning for the job. He made it hard. I kind of like Steve Hyden. I trusted him. Steve Hyden I liked. And Matt Burke, I grew to like too. The defensive line coach is now the DC for D'Amico Ryans. So we had something going there. I kind of liked him. But I didn't trust, Kugler. I didn't trust Vance Joseph. So it made me uneasy the whole time. And it doesn't surprise me that Cliff bore the brunt of that because of the way it was set up. But I just would love to have a setup that I trust and I don't have to worry so much about. Trust goes a long way. Like, you trust that the players will be well prepared. You trust that they'll take every opportunity to try to get this team better, like using the preseason to help, like you taking advantage of mandatory mini camps, and not skipping rookie week like they did 2 years ago. That I still can't forgive. That's just bizarre that you would do that. You draft all these kids you're really excited about, and you have a chance to have them for a week, and you decide, nah, not going to do it. So, yeah, the door might be opening, and I don't know what I'm going to do. But I'll tell you what, if they trade Buddha, I think I'm leaving that door. I'll just mention it to now. Now, I'm not going to stop writing for Revenge of the Birds, and I will be, and you guys know I will try to be as open-minded as I can. But I go by instincts a lot, and, and by common sense. If you have the youngest coaching staff in the league, and two coordinators who've never called plays before in an NFL game, and you're in a division with, and with the likes of McVay and Shanahan, which ironically we have 2 wins over this year. So I mean that got me fired up. But I kind of worry about the games coming up, and can they take care of the Seahawks, who recently have been pounding on or getting the better of us? That'll be something to watch. So anyway, would love to hear your story about this. How close are you? Are you just completely bought in? Are you trusting in the lineup here? And who are you trusting and who are you not trusting? Love to hear that in the comments. And at any time on YouTube or on Twitter. So hope to hear from you. And thank you for joining us today. Thanks to Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter. I was inspired by his story about the Chargers. And it makes total sense to me, the relocation. I'm kind of going through that now with a team up in your area that I've loved all my life since Catfish Hunter came into my heart, the Oakland A's. That is like, I'll give Bidwell credit. If I had to choose between John Fisher and Michael Bidwell, I'd take Michael Bidwell. I mean, John Fisher is a curse to baseball.
To your point, I worked all these Oakland A's games. I got a chance to learn the team a little bit the last few years, just with my sports job. That last game in Oakland was one of the saddest sports moments I've ever seen. I watched it on TV. I wasn't working it that day, but it was one of the saddest baseball games, one of the saddest sporting events, period, I've ever seen. I've seen what relocation itself can do to teams. I've experienced it a few times myself now, but my point is kind of it shouldn't have to get to relocation to say I'm not rooting. It shouldn't have to come to the community being broken altogether to say this is where I'm drawing the line. We can draw the lines at a higher standard than we're just going to move the team from the city.
What are they going to call the A's next year?
They're just the Athletics. So you know how like on the scoreboard they put like OAK as like their initials. It's just going to be ATH is their initials. It's not going to be SAC. It's not going to be Las Vegas. It's just going to be ATH.
Well, athlete.
Yeah, they're just the Athletics. They're not even going to make a Sacramento Athletics jersey. It's just going to say Athletics on the front of it.
Oh, yeah. So, gang, look, do really want to hear from you, and talk me off the ledge, will you? Give me something that would provide hope, and I'll listen. But if you're like me and on the edge too, let's figure out together how we can approach this. But it feels like a tipping point. We'll see what happens, but. Hey, thanks for joining us today, and as you have been doing, and look forward to seeing you next week. In the interim, may the red rain shower down on you into the red, red sea, hopefully Monday night going crazy. Red rain.